Hey, how's everybody doing? Michael again here with another beekeeping video. It's raining right now and I don't have a lot to do, so I decided to come in my patio, have a little fire, and maybe do a little gear talk when it comes to setting up for your first hive. So in the last video, talked about your space in your backyard as a suburban beekeeper and how you can choose a spot and the criteria you want to think about when you're choosing a spot: full sun or partial shade, property line distances, 10 feet if it's facing it, maybe you can get away with a little less if it's facing away, and who are your neighbors and how's that going to affect your neighborhood. So in this video I want to cover what do you need to consider when you want to actually get bees, and how do you choose what style of hive and what source for bees you're gonna go with. These two things kind of go together, and here's why. There are two main ways to get bees. The first way, which a lot of people do, is getting what's called a package of bees. And package bees come in a screened box that's got, anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 bees in it usually. And in that screened box is a can, it looks like a soup can, that's got some sugar water in it, and there's also a queen cage in there with the queen and a few attendants. And the way that works is you get whatever equipment you choose to start with, you shake the bees into your box, you maybe spray them down with some sugar water first, make sure you have wax coated plastic if you're using wax plastic frames, that is. This is a frame with plastic foundation in it. This is what I like to use, just because it's sturdy and it lasts for a long, long time, and it's simple. But there's lots of different options for foundation. If you're using plastic foundation, you make sure it's wax coated, maybe spray with some sugar water, you shake your bees in, you put your queen cage in between some of the frames, there's a candy plug in it that the bees will chew at until they release the queen, and if they've started drawing out your frames, they're going to stay put. Usually, I want to say it takes 24 to 48 hours for them to release the queen in the cage that comes with your package. There will be a little plug you'll cut out, like a cork plug you'll cut away, and behind it should be candy. Or if not, you put some marshmallows in there, and you put her in with the bees, and then they do their thing. So that's one way to get bees. If you choose to go with the package, you can pretty much start whatever kind of hive you want, because you're not using someone else's equipment, you're just getting basically a simulated swarm of bees, and you can put them in whatever you want. So let's say you don't want to do Langstroth beekeeping. Langstroth hives are the typical hives you see. This is a medium Langstroth box. It's 6 5/8 inches deep, and it holds, this is a 10 frame, it holds 10 of these frames. I showed you one earlier. These have a little bit of comb drawn out on them, as you can see. Let the camera focus. This is a plastic foundation, and it has some wax coating to help the bees get started doing their thing so they can draw this comb out. This is what your comb should look like when they start to draw it out. You can see the printed cells underneath that they then expand into these longer cells that they will either direct the queen to lay in, or they'll put nectar, pollen, or whatever they want in there, depending on where it is in the hive and what the purpose of that part of the hive is. So in Langstroth beekeeping, you stack these boxes vertically. That's what most people think about, I think, when they think about a beehive, is a Langstroth beehive. That's probably the most popular format and system for beekeeping in the US. And in other parts of the world, it's not that uncommon either. Now, you do have other options. If you want to go with a horizontal hive, you can do that. You may have to start with package bees though. And if you want to go with all medium boxes like I did with my hives, I only use this size box and frame for everything. So if you want to go with all mediums, you might have to think about package bees. Now, why would you want to do that? The reason I went all medium is because I can take any frame out of any box and put it in any other hive, in any box, for whatever I need. If I have a weak split that needs brood, I can just pull a brood frame out of another hive, slip it in that split, boom, they've got brood. I don't have to worry about having deep frames with brood on them that I can't put in my medium box. Now, you can do that with deep boxes as well. If you have deep hive bodies and then you have mediums for your honey, but if you need for some reason to put a medium frame of honey into a deep box, you can do it, but then the bees are going to draw out all along the bottom of this frame on this bottom bar here. They're going to draw out the extra space, and you're going to have like this much just comb hanging off the bottom of your frame when you pull it out in a couple weeks. And it's not the end of the world, but if you want to use it in a honey super, you really can't until you cut all that off. And if it's got live brood in it, or it's got larval bees in it, you may not want to do that. So that's kind of an issue. And you can't take a tall frame and stick it in a short box unless you pull a frame from underneath it so it can fit in there. So that's a disadvantage to using mixed gear where you have different depth of boxes. So that's why I went with all mediums. Now, I was able to find what's called a nucleus colony, which is another option. So you have package bees, that's a box of bees. A nucleus colony, what I bought was basically a medium box with the center 6 frames were bees, brood, and nectar, and pollen. So these 2 outside frames on each side were just blank. Were just printed cells with wax coating, and that's it. Nothing. No drawn comb, nothing. So it was a nuke in a full-size 10-frame medium box. Just a starter hive. But it came with a bottom, a top, and 1 brood chamber of medium frames. And so I just went with that. And it has its advantages. So if you are into the idea of having all interchangeable gear where you don't have to worry about having different depths of frame and different depths of boxes, going all medium is very advantageous for that. The other thing, it's a little bit lighter when you're handling boxes. A medium full of honey is heavy, no matter how you cut it. I want to say they're 60 to 70 pounds, I believe, when they're full. So it's heavy still with a medium. The brood boxes can get kind of heavy sometimes too, especially with deep frames. With medium frames, they're really not that hard to handle. So if you have a couple of medium boxes of honey and the rest of your mediums are all brood, the brood ones are not hard to handle. So that's another advantage. The disadvantage is, like my big hives right now, I have 4 of these for the brood chamber. The brood chamber is the part of the hive where the queen will lay her eggs and where the larva will hatch into bees. It's basically their little nesting area. So that's where all the bee production happens. Now, 2 deeps, which are 9 5/8 deep, compared to this is 6 5/8. 2 deeps are basically the equivalent of 3 mediums. But my hives, the Italian bees that I keep, and they're sort of local mutts really, because they're homegrown queens. I have all homegrown queens this year. They will run about 4 of these medium boxes as a brood chamber when the hive is full size. That's usually the second year. First year they won't get that big. Second year they will. So the second year hives have 4 of these for the brood chamber. Now, if I have 4 of these and there's 10 frames in each box, that's 40 frames to go through when I have to do spring inspections. And a lot of times, spring inspections, I'm pulling these out, looking all over them to look for queen cells on the bottom, queen cells on the side. You gotta shake all the bees off and look at the sides to make sure there's no queen cells in there. If you start to notice queen cells in your hive, that can take a long time with 4 of these boxes full of frames full of bees. And not only that, but the bees start to get frustrated after, I don't know, it depends on the weather, but they start to get a little frustrated when you're in the hive that long. So spring inspections can be challenging in all medium hives. That is a big downside to using all medium gear. If you use a 2 deep brood chamber, which is a common practice with a lot of beekeepers, is to have 2 deeps, and then you only have 20 frames if you're running 10 frame gear to go through when you're doing hive inspections, and that's a big advantage in the spring. On the rest of the year, once swarm season is pretty much closed out, it's not as big of a deal. If you do have to go through and look for resource frames, if they're backfilling brood chamber frames with honey, that can take a long time, and that does happen, especially if your hive goes queenless. So that's another consideration. And the cool thing though is with a medium, all medium setup, if that happens, you can pull those resource frames, those honey frames from the brood chambers and put them up in your supers and replace them with a blank foundation frame and let the bees draw that out, and you can just extract that with your honey and put it back afterward. Now, if it was a deep frame and you had medium honey supers, you could still extract it, but you wouldn't be able to keep it on the hive in your medium box. You'd have to pull it, put it somewhere else, and maybe extract it first. So it starts to become a little logistically challenging when you're running mixed gear sometimes. But there's nothing wrong with running deeps and mediums. Lots of people do it, and in fact, I'm tempted to give it a shot because I have a feeling inspections would be a lot easier with the deep brood chambers, so I may try it myself. Now, if you want to get a nucleus, I would recommend that you try to find some local beekeepers who might be able to sell you bees, because I'm not aware, and this might be a thing, I haven't looked lately, but I'm not sure if a lot of suppliers will ship a nucleus. You may have to pick them up, and if you're trying to buy from a Northern California supplier, that could be problematic, depending on where you live. Now, I'm in SoCal, so keep in mind a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about as regards to, or in regards to seasonal shifts and stuff may not line up with your seasons if you're in a different part of the country, and some of our bee behavior is different because of our winters being so mild. So beekeeping is highly local. If you can find a local beekeeping club that you can go to. In SoCal, I've gone to the Beekeepers Association of Southern California clubs. It's called the BASC if you look them up online. Find a chapter meeting near you. For me, there's one in La Mirada that I went to a few times. I can't go now because of my work schedule, but it was very helpful. I met some good people. I met somebody who lives in like a few blocks from me who's a beekeeper, and she helped get me started. So she happens to do all mediums as well. And that convinced me, like, hey, she's been doing beekeeping for 15 years and she does all mediums. So cool, I'm gonna do it. And that's how I kind of got into that side of it. But if your local beekeepers run mostly deeps, wow, it's really raining. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's coming down. If your local beekeepers run mostly deeps and that's how they manage their hives, and that's who you're going to be mentored by all means, do deeps. It doesn't matter. And you're probably going to be able to get a nucleus from a mentor who has deep hives, and they're probably going to make you a deep nuke. So you're probably going to have to do deeps. No biggie. Now, horizontal hives for a suburban beekeeper, in my opinion, I don't really think they're the best decision if you want to have multiple hives. If you only want one or two hives, it could probably work. But the reason I don't think they're the best decision is because of space considerations. The cool thing about having stackable gear is you can fit your hives into a smaller footprint. Most commercial beekeepers put hives on pallets, and they have 4 of them, and the entrances will face different directions. Then they can just come scoop them off the forklift, put them on a flatbed, strap them down and haul them away, and right off into the sunset and put them somewhere else. So with stackable hives, it gives you that flexibility. If you have a horizontal hive, you have to think about space a little bit differently, because you have all your frames arranged sideways in a long row. And it's easier to manage because you don't have to lift any boxes, so that's a big advantage. But you also have to have separate covers over the top bars. So this part of the frame here is called the top bar of the frame. So you have a top bar, you have a bottom bar, and you have the little side flues here. When you have a regular Langstroth box, all you are exposing when you pull a box out is 10 frames at once. However, if you have a horizontal hive, these are all going to be lined up end to end all the way across your hive. So you have to have separate covers for sets of those frames so that you don't open your hive and have 40 frames of bees coming at you. And that can be a little tricky. Now you're still going to fumble around with some pieces. You can use cloth covers over sections if you want. A lot of people make wood covers with ventilation over them. That's a whole thing. So that's something to consider. The other thing is now the footprint, it's going to have to be on a stand. Most horizontal hives are going to be on a stand, so they're, maybe about yay high or lower when you open them so that they're easy to work on. And they're going to take up probably 4.5 feet wide, 4.5 feet wide. And whatever, 20 something inches deep, depth of frame plus the hinges and everything. So you can have, it depends on your space. If you've got space for a few of those around, then it's not as big of a deal. But what it can do is it can increase the amount of range that you have flying bees coming into your hives in your yard, because it's spread out over this horizontal plane rather than the vertical plane, where a Langstroth box is stacked and there's a little entrance at the bottom, and that's it. The bees go in and out of that. A lot of horizontal hives, you'll have a long box and then there will be 2 or 3 entrances across the back that the bees come in and out of, and if you have 2 of those next to each other, you've got this wide swath of bee flight path. So you have to think that through. Now with 2 horizontal hives, you're taking up the same amount of horizontal space that you could fit 5 or 6 potentially vertical hives in, and you have a similar swath of bee flight path to manage. So for that reason, I think vertical hives are probably a better way to go. Plus, more people keep bees in Langstroth vertical hives, or I'm sorry, just regular Langstroth hives, and you're more likely to be able to get gear for them more easily and get training in using that specific kind of hive in a local beekeeping club or from a local mentor. However, you may find that the horizontal hive fits exactly what you want to do, and hey, more power to you. This is something to keep in mind too as you're researching this stuff. For every beekeeper, there is an opinion and an experience, and some of them are great, some of them aren't. I don't know everything, and I don't claim to, but I have my experience, and I'm glad to share that. I would just say, try to find people who have reasoning behind what they're telling you for beekeeping. If the thing I've been really conscious of as I've been learning about beekeeping the last few years is when I have a beekeeper tell me, oh, you have to do it this way or it's not going to work, it's going to fail, and da-da-da. I'll say, okay, well, why is that? And if they don't have a rational explanation for it, then I kind of take it with a grain of salt. I'll research it still, and they might be right just because they don't fully understand why it works that way. But I try to really research things out rather than just take people's word for things just because they said it and someone else told them to do it. There's a lot of tradition in beekeeping, and some of it's great, some of it isn't, some of it doesn't even apply in other climates. So one person's just rigid, way of doing things might work really well for them, but they might live in North Dakota, and that might not apply to Southern California. So you have to really be very discerning when you're gathering information about beekeeping and make sure it's relevant to your climate and relevant to your situation. Ultimately, bees are a living biological organism, and they operate based on their biology. And if you understand their biology, you can keep bees. That should be the basis for what we do, I think, rather necessarily than tradition. Now, traditions aren't necessarily wrong, but just be discerning. And, gather lots of information from lots of sources. I'm not the end-all be-all by any stretch of the imagination, but I can tell you some people who I've learned a lot from, who I've really found useful. One is Randy Oliver. He has a website called Scientific Beekeeping. You probably want to use Google to search any topics within that website, because the search tool on the website is not good. But there's a lot of good information if you're willing to sift through it. It's a little hard to find in there, but it's very, very good, very scientifically based studies that he's done on different mite treatments, different hive configurations, and lots of stuff. And he's a Northern California beekeeper. Another guy who has an awesome resource website is Michael Bush. Basically, he has an entire book that he wrote online available for free. And it's actually pretty easy to search within the website. I probably read 80% of his website before I even got bees, and I felt very, very prepared, at least mentally. But there's always stuff you're going to learn. Doing it is totally different than reading about it. And once you have bees and you actually have to open your hive, it's a different story than reading about it. But I felt at least like I had a basic grasp on what I was sort of getting myself into as far as how bees worked. But there's no substitute for experience, so a mentor can be really, really helpful. So if you find someone you click with at a bee meeting and you're like, yeah, I feel like that could be good, you can ask them, say, hey, I want to get started beekeeping, I don't know what I'm doing, can I come like play with your bees with you or whatever? You know, we don't play with bees, but can I come do a hive inspection? They may even have some classes you can take. I know our chapter, there were a couple of older beekeepers who did a beekeeping 101 course, and they had some hives at a local garden, and you could go meet them and do beekeeping classes with them. So there's lots of resources available if you look for them. So to recap, before you pick your equipment, you might have to figure out where you're going to get your bees and whether you're going to do a package or you're going to do a nuke. And if you're going to do a nuke, where are you going to get it? And is it going to be a deep or a medium? So that's going to determine whether you're going to do deep or medium brood chambers. If you can't get a medium nuke and you want to do all mediums, you may be stuck with deep nukes, and you might have to start with a deep brood chamber. Now you can transition to medium by stacking on medium boxes on that first deep box, and then cutting down your deeps eventually. You can let them go through the winter and leave that box on the bottom, and they'll abandon it most of the time. And you can pull that out, cut the frames down, and then you can go all medium, but it's going to take a whole season if you really want to do all medium. If you don't really care, go with deep. Nothing wrong with it. People have been doing it for forever, and it works great. So the most important thing is figure out what you want to do and do it. Get some bees and start beekeeping. It's worth it. So for the next video, I think I want to talk about some more specifics of hive setup, how to make hive stands, and how to manage your gear. Thanks a bunch. Please do remember to like and subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments section and ding the little bell so that you get a notification when I make new videos. All right, everybody, stay healthy and God bless.